Welcome to the third session of Community Network Exchange 2020. I am Sara Farooqui. I am moderating this particular session today. I manage research and advocacy at Digital Empowerment Foundation. So we have a stellar panel here today with us. People from different walks of life, from different countries, from different time zones joining us in. So the session for today is policy and regulation for mass adoption of community networks. And we have Carlos Rey Moreno joining us in from Spain. He is co-lead local networks, policy and strategy for Association for Progressive Communications. We have Teddy Woodhouse joining us from the United Kingdom. He is research manager for access and affordability for the World Wide Web Foundation. We have Ashia Neela, who is founder and CEO for Women in Digital, joining us in from Bangladesh. And we will also be having John Jack, who is the Deputy Chief Information Officer for the Vanuatu government, joining us in hopefully today. Basically this session is that even though we have community networks and they have been successfully been a practice as an alternative method to connect communities to the internet, they have not become a viable alternative across the world. So this is a session where we will look into what kinds of policy, what kind of regulatory and advocacy and design effort is required to facilitate greater adoption of community networks across the world to help fast track access for the unconnected in countries and regions across the world. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to first bring in Carlos and hear what he has to say on the topic. Carlos, over to you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in the summit. Please cut me whenever. I'm not quite sure how long I have allocated for whatever I'm gonna say, but yeah. So thank you everyone for attending and for your interest in such a topic. As you know, the Association for Progressive Communications have been behind creating an enabling environment for community networks. A part of that is policy, and I will talk to it in a bit, but there are other elements that, answering a bit to what Sarah was saying, that would make, I wouldn't say community networks are not viable. I think they are viable, and definitely there is proof that they are viable, is that mass adoption that has not happened. And I think we started very early, right? We are in an industry that is very young or relatively young, where there are narratives that industry was created with, right? That narrative that said that you needed to be a national provider that had to have equipment from the landing station of the fiber optic, or having a terrestrial station for a satellite connectivity, and then build all the infrastructure from the backbone to the last mile to connect every single client, right? And for that, you needed huge amount of capital, huge amount of skills, huge amount of pretty much everything, right? So that's how the telecoms industry was created. That's the narrative that have been part of us for the last 20-25 years, that the internet has been evolving and reaching pretty much everyone's life in one way or another. But yet that model has shown that has shown its limits, and that they are not able to provide affordable connectivity to everyone, and that we are stuck, and we've been stuck for a couple of years now, on that 50% of the population using the internet. But at the same time that those models have shown their limits, we are seeing that it's not necessary to have an operator that goes all the way from the landing station of the fiber optic to the last mile connectivity. That fiber is permeating in many countries, that is accessible way closer to the user, that the technologies, the cost of the technologies themselves are being reduced, that the skills to operate those technologies are being reduced, and that more and more people are setting up or finding the confidence to say, okay, I can do this, right? But we are at the beginning of that, and that's a cultural change that can be promoted by policy and regulation, but it's also a cultural change that will happen the same way that happened with journalism, with the with the internet, little by little, we will see that on the telecoms industry. And although it's a bit of a, I don't know, naive things to say, I think it's a question of time in some ways. It's a question of time, but we can aid it with some elements, and definitely policy and regulation has a lot of things to say in relation to help that transition going faster and to make more people willing or wanting to make use of those opportunities that the granularity of the fiber, the low cost of satellite connectivity, the low cost of technologies are making possible, no? And there are, well, on the different things that we've written from APC and with other colleagues, we see 5 elements in policy and regulation that are necessary for that enabling environment. The first one is operator licensing. It is impossible that you ask anyone, a community, whoever, to start something with any chance to be sustainable if it's illegal, right? Or if making it legal has such a financial cost, in terms of fees, in terms of bureaucratic compliance, in terms of all those things. It's impossible to make a business model based on that for people whose economic income, well, their monthly income is reduced, right? So reducing the barriers of obtaining an operator's license, that then is critical to enter into wholesale agreements with wholesale providers that would make your business model a bit more sustainable, is necessary, right? And we need to advocate for reducing the fees and reducing the bureaucratic burden or the administrative burden for communities to set up legally their own initiatives. I think the second part is a spectrum. You probably have heard me talking about the spectrum in many places, and access to spectrum is critical.
Yeah.
At the moment, we keep on talking about community networks and everything they've done, and it's, with pleasure that people talk about community networks in all the venues, but they are based on using a technology that wasn't meant to be a technology for broadband, was meant to be a technology for experimenting in a lab. And we've been doing whatever we could with that technology, that is Wi-Fi, to provide connectivity to thousands of people. But it's not a technology that was designed for that, right? And yet the technology that was designed for that is mobile broadband, require one single thing, that is access to a spectrum that is on the hands of very few companies. That is true that they have paid a lot of money for that spectrum, but this is also true that they are only using it in urban areas where they can see profit out of it. So it would be much easier to make sustainable business model for community networks, to make it easier for investors, because it's much easier to say covering a community with a mobile broadband base station would cost this much, because designing a network with mobile broadband is much easier than designing it with Wi-Fi. That is always a different case and a different scenario, would make it more viable, as you were saying, to do that, right? So the problem is that they have that spectrum and they are not using it. So advocating, working with government, assisting governments on to how to produce regulation around spectrum sharing. If at the end what we want is to connect everyone affordably, we need to come up with a way, with quid pro quo, with incentives for operators. I don't know, but the main resource to make the connect and unconnected happen is a spectrum, and the spectrum is not being used efficiently. So we need to come up with clever ways to make that happen, and one of them is a spectrum sharing, which will definitely benefit many communities to set up their connectivity. Then going a bit faster, because maybe I'm running out of time and I want Teddy and Aisha and the rest to talk. There is access to backbone and backhaul connectivity. In the case of India, it's very blatant. You have BharatNet, is there, is a news, you cannot use it, you cannot access it. Why? Let's make it easier to access backbone. I mean, without backbone and access to backbone, is impossible to provide connectivity. The infrastructure is there. Let's make it easier for the communities to access it, period. And then access to funding. We will get into funding in a second. Let me use that last. And then access to telecoms data. transparency on
Yeah.
where the towers are, where the spectrum is being used, where the fiber is, where the point of presence are, is going to make it much, much easier to design those networks. It's going to make it much cheaper to design those networks. Yet, we don't know. We don't know. You need to, where is the closer tower? Where is the closest fiber? Where the operators are? What is the available capacity in those places? That data should be open. And if the goal was to connect everyone, I think the problem is that the goal has been to maximize the profit of a series of companies. And then, we are at odds with that goal. But if the real goal for everyone was, let's provide affordable connectivity to absolutely everyone in the planet, access to telecoms data is critical in order to reduce the barriers of entry for the different operators. So let's get into financings. That is the fifth element, and in particular about the universal, the
Yeah.
the access fund, the universal access funds. And there is going to be in the post-COVID scenario where many companies and private sector are going to be asking the public, the government, to rescue them or to support them to provide services, as we saw with financial entities and other entities in the crisis in 2008. We are going to see a fight for public funding to do this, right? And we need to see what they decide, whether they decide to fund private companies that they profited for the last 20 years for the, like margins of 40, 50%. I mean, they were the most profitable companies ever. And what they did was sharing those profits among their shareholders rather than saving and extending connectivity and whatnot. Now, those people that were rich, that didn't save for extending that connectivity, now we are going to save them again, as we did with the banks. And instead of looking at other ways of rural development, other ways, and with those ways, community networks and subsidizing and using the USF for universal affordable connectivity could be something that progressive governments should be looking into in terms of enriching connectivity and whatnot. Just the last sentence, if you are interested on this topic, on Wednesday, actually moderated by someone from A4AI, Eleanor Sarpong, there is going to be a panel on the Community Network Summit in Africa that is going to be looking specifically at universal service funds with experts from the continent, and I invite you to join. Thank you very much, and sorry if I took too long.
No worry. At this point, I want to bring in Asha to give in her perspective. Asha, I'm pronouncing your name right. I hope. Or are you Aisha? I'm so sorry.
Ashia. Yeah,
Asha. Okay, perfect.
You are right. So thank you, Sarah, for inviting me and asking me the questions. I think Carlos already briefly described everything. Actually, he didn't miss any point. So I'm not I just adding something with him because he already including everything. So the thing is, actually, if we think the community development, in that time we need to think about our rural area. So the in our rural area, we are thinking we are always see one common thing, that is the in rural Bangladesh they always think internet means only Facebook. So actually we are not able to make them still clear what is internet. So if they are not understand what is internet, that is the challenge to use that internet and make them benefited from the internet. So that is main challenge I have seen in Bangladesh still now. And the thing is, another thing is when we are working in different villages, in that time we face another thing, broadband is not available in everywhere. So if I think about Bangladesh, Nepal, India, and I have working so many different countries that everywhere in the same conditions. So in the urban area, we get the internet very easily and affordable way, but in rural area, still is not. It's really tough to access the internet. And another thing is some people use from mobile data, but that was is much expensive. So I feel somehow we are not still able to develop the right community for the internet use because of the there is a very little amount of broadband available in everywhere, and another is affordability because still it's so expensive. And but the thing is actually people want to use internet. They are trying to use it is their local regular life, but it's expensive till now. So, and another thing is that there is a taboo about internet. So they are thinking there is cyber issues, there is so many crime happening if I use my use internet in my PC, so they will take all the data. So there is some taboo still, so we need to work on that also, because actually the all the limitation I have had getting everything in the rural areas, because they are not still get the real interest of using internet and the real things of internet, so they think like a different way. So yeah, and another thing is data security issues. And the thing is, still people thinking if I use internet, then my data will be taken by government or any NGOs and any other bodies. So we need to actually describe people what is why actually needed is. And another thing is, when we develop the policy and regulation, we always think about urban area, urban thinking, and the capital of that countries, or the main towns of that countries. So, but when we develop any policies, I think we should consider all over the countries and each and every angle of these countries, because if I am not thinking about all the people, then how can I connect all these countries? So for the policy and regulation, we need to make it easy. And for the regulation especially, we need to make a very rural and urban friendly regulation, then both party can use that one. Yeah, so yeah, so far it's for myself, for using internet and making the connectivities benefited. Actually, how can people will get benefit from it? So I think if we focus on the all over the things, like not the urban things, we need to focus on the rural development and also think about the policy regulation for them.
Great. Can we have Teddy?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. I guess I have to also similarly kind of find myself in pretty close agreement with both Carlos and Achia and what they've said so far about kind of there's multiple options in the policy and regulatory space for community networks. Carlos mentioning those 5, and then also the importance of thinking about this in the kind of context of how different things are in an urban context and in a rural context in terms of providing internet service. But I guess to briefly describe kind of my background and hopefully what I can contribute to the panel is, so I'm with the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and our mission is broadly about focusing on making the cost of internet access as affordable as possible, being no more than 1 gigabyte for roughly 2% of the average monthly income in a country. And community networks are a crucial part of this mission, and making it realizable for kind of more than just that 50% that are already connected. And so as an organization, we focus on policy and regulatory reform, and kind of have 2 tactics that are relevant to the discussion that we're having here today. The first one is we find and highlight good examples of practice. So we find countries that are, making some of these changes that make it a bit more welcoming and possible for community networks to operate. And I'd be happy to go into some examples around how licensing has been changed, or spectrum allocations, or kind of additional regulatory clarity in some circumstances have provided kind of good lessons for us of this is how we can develop policies and regulations that support community networks. And the other part is through our broader policy advocacy work, where we kind of encourage policy change or new ways of thinking about internet service, kind of with a focus on low and middle income countries across the globe. And I think one potential kind of unique viewpoint that we had came out of last year's affordability report, which we focused on market competition. So generally, markets that are more competitive are cheaper for consumers and kind of have a number of benefit for consumers to kind of shop around, choose which is the best deal for them, and things like that. And I think one thing that we found and wanted to emphasize through our analysis around market competition is that it's not just market competition between operators, but also thinking about market diversity as a point of strength in terms of providing internet to a wide geography or to a whole country. Is it's bringing in sources of capital, sources of funding for these business models that aren't just the traditional models, but how do you do that through things like community networks or wholesale open access networks, which kind of exist higher up in the kind of internet's architecture as well. And seeing that you kind of blend together all of these projects, because those seem to have kind of great rates of success in terms of providing affordable internet access across different geographies, across different contexts. And so as we're trying to both extend access to new areas, but also making sure that that access is of meaningful quality and affordable, it's kind of use all tactics above, all of the tactics above available to us, including community networks. So yeah, looking forward to this discussion and getting into more detail, but I'll hand it back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. So now I want to hear just, closing remarks from all of you. So Carlos, if you want to add something, or if you want to, comment on something that the other speakers have said, you have the floor for exactly 2 minutes. Carlos?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like maybe commenting on something that Teddy just said around good practices. The positive thing is that we are seeing government regulators all around the world and governments all around the world that are seeing this, and they are not many yet. And sadly, in Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, the Pacific, there are very few cases. And that's probably why this session is very important, why it's great that there are so many people, why it's great that we are discussing this. Because if you look at regions on the global South and how regulators and how community networks are pushing regulation to change, and progressive regulation is making community networks to thrill, you can see that in Latin America, there is, that synergy, that ecosystem is actually reinforcing each other. Then you have Africa, where similar things are starting to happen, but it's a bit, I would say, behind in terms of that thrilling, that blooming ecosystem that is happening in Latin America. And then you have Asia, where regulators are really behind. And I wonder why. And that's something that we need to work together. The Internet Society, the Alliance for Affordable Internet, APC, all, DEF, all the country organizations that are doing real on the ground great work, that have been talking throughout CNX. And we need to find ways on how do we work and engage with regulators in a way that they see this need of making it easier for all of you in the ground to do the work easier than all the challenges that you are already facing. So let's work to.
Thanks. Ashia, would you want to respond to what has been said so far?
So actually, what I actually think, already I mentioned about rural and urban areas. So that is one thing. And another thing is minimize the costing. Like it should be affordable for all. Then people can use the more internet, and obviously policy, the same things actually, innovative policy solutions, and ensuring access to community network and how they easily access the things, and regulation should be easy. And as a woman and even entrepreneur, actually I have a demand for Internet Society and any other places, what I always say. So some package for especially for women entrepreneurs, that can be a very easy regulation and regulator, and especially the strong security based internet. So I think that will be really good for the women user, because we are also part of the community. So I think we should take some initiative and some special policy for the women. Yeah, that's it for my side.
Yeah. No, that's a very important point you've highlighted. Teddy, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I just add in terms of thinking about the different kind of histories that are coming from different regions, and kind of looking ahead, what are some options that we can think about? I think So from the affordability report, what we do is we assess the policy and regulatory environment for, so far it's been 60 countries. We're going to jump up to 70 in about a month with the new edition that's soon to come, if I can give it a brief plug. But part of what we do there is we assess the policy and regulatory environment in 60 countries, low and middle income contexts. And in terms of regional trends, one of particular strengths in the Asia Pacific region is the strength around public access solutions and how well they're supported from governments. And I think that could be kind of a potential strong point from which we can kind of swing into an additional advantage with community networks by kind of seeing a stronger relationship between the two and kind of basis of collaboration, because I think public access points can be great anchor points and anchor institutions to support community networking out in geographies where there's going to be kind of market failure for the classical business case. And so I think that's a potential way that we can think of using what already exists and the advantages that already exist in the region in terms of kind of continuing to push the needle and expand access into new areas.
Yeah. So now what I'm going to do is we have a short segment called Voices of the Community at this point, where we, got different community networks to send us, short videos, short snippets of the work that they're doing across the world. So we're going to play those, and it'll give you a little more context and idea of what this entire conference also is about. And right after that, we're going to dive back in again, and that's when we're going to open the floor for questions. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, any comments, anything, do feel free to paste it in the question and answer box for our panelists, and we will be starting with the videos just now. Are the videos ready?
Today is March 12, 2011, Saturday. We arrived here yesterday to look at the relay station and to do some maintenance work. Here, luckily it snowed very heavily yesterday, and we have this relay station at Khopra. This place is Khopra, and we have a relay station here. And this is the second relay station we have in this region to connect to Mustang district as well. You can see the panel antenna over there. That panel antenna is connected to another mountain, which is about 15 kilometers on that side. And that relay station is connected to Pokhara. And we have also another radio pointing towards the Himalaya that goes to Mustang district. We also have these panel antennas over here that are connected to, there are several villages actually in this region. There are 9-10 villages in this region. All those villages are connected from these antennas. We also have a wind generator here for backup. Usually that wind generator is not enough. We have solar panels to run all these equipments, and that wind generator is for backup because we don't get much much wind in this area. Sometimes we get some wind, so that's why we put the wind generator for backup power.
Taman is a beautiful rural village located in Tamankola Rural Municipality of Nepal. It is 377 kilometers away from the capital city of Nepal. Nepal was in lockdown for 6 months, and schools in Nepal were shut down with no further notice when they will reopen. So the students in these rural villages has no access to either school or any other learning materials. So I came up with an idea of establishing a community network that will provide access to different open source educational. We have used an offline server that powers more than 10,000 of books, uh, 300 audiobooks, 200 videos, and numerous other open source learning options such as Khan Academy, offline Wikipedia, and many other local contents in Nepali language. This offline server is connected to a wireless access point so that we could broadcast all these learning materials in wireless channel, and nearby students and other residents can access all these contents using Wi-Fi facility in their smartphone or laptops or any other computer. The residents of Tamankola are using this community network to learn the course materials and other extracurricular activities. We, along with the local government of Taman, are using this network to provide internet access to all the residents of Taman and letting them connect to the globe.
Minglaba, my name is Svetlana Zenz. I'm representing Myanmar Center for Responsible Business, and I'm really glad and honored to see you digitally here at the Community Network Forum. Thank you very much for letting us share our knowledge on Internet Shutdown case. MCRB, together with Freedom Expression Myanmar, PANDIAR, and MIDO, under the umbrella of Myanmar Digital Rights Forum, we're conducting a year-long campaign, which is lifting restrictions on internet in some townships of Rakhine State and Chin State. As some of you already know that there were restrictions imposed, and on August the 2nd, some restrictions were bit partially lifted. So instead of full blackout, there was introduced 2G technology in their affected townships. However, it still leaves 1.4 million people in the information blackout. The access to information is not relevant. Even the access to public sources is very restricted, so not everyone can have information from that and upload video, for example. Access to Facebook is also very restricted due to a lot of visual content like photos, videos, and text, of course, like significant amount of text is restricted. So what we are calling with our MDRF group that internet restrictions should be lifted. However, with the community network forum, it's also important to highlight that community networks in affected areas also can be useful and also can be taken as an option, temporary option, to let people know and to let people to have access to information, what is going around them, of course, especially now during the election period and during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is important that people will at least have access to information with diminished risks to their health, to their safety, and also would let them get connected to the world and to the internet itself. And we think that the community networks can be also useful for socio-economic development in the affected areas, but this is not the constant solution. It's a temporary solution, and which could be also taken in place to resume the situation before the situation in the affected areas is stabilized. So thank you very much. It's quite short of time.
Yeah. So after that, after those particular videos, we now open the floor to questions, and this can be more of a free flowing discussion. So feel free to dive in. So if we have any questions for our three panelists today, if not, then I'm going to, I have a couple of questions myself. But before that, if anybody would like to ask anything, Osama?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question, especially to Carlos, from the perspective that we are talking about regulatory issues, advocacy issues, and mass adoption, which is a serious issue that we have been talking about community networks for a very long time in the last 10 years. But in terms of scaling up, it's not happening. So I was just wondering, is that since APC sits on this, platform where they have information from all over the world in terms of best practices, in terms of what kind of practices have been adopted, what do you think is the right way to go forward for mass adoption, in terms of how do we scale it up? Because half the world is yet to be connected.
Thanks, Osama, for such an easy question to answer. No, it's difficult. It's difficult. Is what I was saying at the beginning. We need to change a lot of minds from both sides, right? There are people who really want the status quo to continue, and they are doing absolutely everything in their hand, and they do have a lot of power to remain. I mean, in the case of India with Geo and everything, is pretty blatant. Like, they are going to do everything for that narrative to continue being, we are the only ones who can do this, and wait until we do it. And and I'm sure you are experimenting that in many rural areas of India, how Geo is actually, or from what I heard from Sarvani, from Ritu, there are small ISPs that are closing down just because Geo is promising that they are going to connect, yet they never connect, yet the small operators, they don't invest because they never know when Geo is going to come. So there is this narrative of multinational companies that is about big businesses, big capital, other interests that go beyond the human interest that we need to deal with. And there is the other side of the communities themselves, and all of us, and our responsibility to keep on lowering those barriers that go beyond policy and regulation, right? That go beyond, that is about how more people really think they can do this. I was thinking about this morning, right? Like, what was the transition in between those people that started building their houses, with very, those first architects, right? And how architecture was probably something that very few people mastered, and someone in that community was mastering, and and or in the world, how that went to now everyone or many more people can build houses, or the same goes for water, or the same goes for fixing a car. There was a transition, and I think we are being part of that transition. And I think it sounds, probably you were expecting another answer from myself, but we need to keep being there. And I think, yes, DF and the wireless for communities have been there for a long time, and it's been a pioneer. We saw Mahavir there, who is also a pioneer, but we see that transition from very few to few that I think is small, but is not negligible. I think I had a similar question when I started in South Africa, banging my head against the wall. And I said this like in 2014, I think, to someone, like, why we keep on, why not so many other communities are jumping into this? Why not? Why, like, really, what are we doing wrong? And this friend of mine told me, look, what you are doing is not minor. You've started a candle, and what we are doing is to keep that candle alive. The problem would be the candle turning off, but that candle is alive. Now there are more candles, And we need just to wait for the right time for people to start, keep on pushing. And I think none of us have stopped pushing on changing regulation, on making more examples, on training communities, on developing new technologies. Keep on pushing, and at some point, people will be ready, the technologies will be ready, the regulation will be ready, and it will spread by fire. But at the moment, what the best thing we can do is to keep those candles alive, to keep lighting as many candles as possible. And when all those other things happen, we are going to see, like, from very few to few, if you look at the last 10 years and you've been around, there is a transition. We are much better organized. There is much more information. It is easier for people to start. Let's keep on working so it is even easier for others to start. And it might not happen tomorrow. And that's life, I think. And we need to accept that. We need to accept that others cannot do it faster either. And if we want, and rural development takes time, and it has taken time always. We are fighting something that no one has been able to. It's not only the internet, it's rural development itself. And inequality in urban rural development has been happening forever. It's not an easy problem to solve, and we are doing our best. And I do strongly believe I wouldn't be here waking up at 5:30 to talk to you if I didn't think that there is that we are doing the right thing, and that I want to support events like this one, and that I want to inspire people that are here, because I do strongly believe that we are in the right path, and that message of hope is the only thing I can give you, Sam.
Yeah, that's a great way to end this. That, light more candles, and there is a certain message of hope coming in from this conversation. We have a question from Waqas Hassan. Can the Universal Service Fund, wherever available, help with scaling up the community networks? Are there any examples of this kind of collaboration? So, Terry, would you like to take that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. I think a key way that universal service funds can support there are kind of multiple ways, and I think it depends on kind of the level of how much a universal service fund would be interested in getting involved. But I think kind of as a minimum, there is great potential for projects and institutions that get served through a universal service model, whether that's schools or libraries or community centers, serving as anchor institutions from which then further networking can be done on a community level and kind of on a DIY basis. And so that's kind of, I think, what you consider what would be like good practice minimum in terms of essentially building out to a good point and then letting others build onto that and making that relationship as easy as possible. So it's kind of going back to what Carlos was just answering about kind of the simplicity that's needed of making it easier for people to connect multiple networks together. And I think beyond that, there's also a great potential for universal service funds to also think about directly supporting and funding community networks as well, where there's a clear market failure for the classical business model, which is kind of the, government doesn't get involved. We let traditional mobile network operators come in and try to provide service, where that's not happening and where it doesn't look like that model is going to work successfully, even with some kind of more modest level incentives. I think community networks are a great way to fill that gap, because there are simply going to be parts of the world where that model is going to make the most sense. And so it's, moving universal service funds from just being kind of subsidies that go back into the traditional business market, but also supporting forms of innovation, whether that's technical or kind of in terms of the scales of networks as well. In terms of examples where we've seen that, examples of the kind of more classical public access model exist in a number of places. I think a good one to look at could be the Tech for Ed in Philippines. But in terms of USF's directly funding community networks, there's not one that I know of that's kind of active yet. But it would be one that I would be very interested in seeing happen in the near future.
Great. we have a question for Ashia, which I find very, very interesting. So what can be done to break the belief in Bangladesh that Facebook is not the internet?
Very interesting questions, actually. The thing is that in Bangladesh, everybody use internet from the mobile phone. So they get within 3,000 taka a smartphone. So, and in that smartphone, there is always a icon that is called Facebook. So that's why they always really easy to access the Facebook, and they think this is the internet, actually. So I believe actually we can do so many awareness program workshops, actually why internet this is not internet, and internet this is the things, and it is internet. Actually, what is internet, we need to know them. So we can do so many workshop training and other things, awareness campaign, and this is the thing we can change their mind. But the thing is actually the building the Facebook icon in the smartphone, and the rural Bangladeshi people, they easily buy that Facebook mobile phone. So they really easily access the internet. So I think that's the main problem. So we can do one thing: we should remove the Facebook from the mobile phones, and then they are not getting that thing easily. So then they will think, I need to make buy data first, then I can use that, and I will download Facebook, and through internet I can use that thing. So then I think they will understand actually what is internet. This is the way I think they can do this. So no building app in mobile phone.
So actually, Ashia, the question that I was intending to drive you to say is that, if we don't know what is internet, it's also difficult to aspire for, alternative network like community networks or network that gives me the internet, so that was the reason I was asking, especially because obviously the entities and the internet companies or the such companies are going to tell people that they are the ultimate, they are.
Yes. That is the main thing, actually. So actually people are using mobile data.
We also, Asha?
Yeah, I want to add one thing, that people are using mobile data, but they don't understand that is internet. They think it's mobile data, something come from mobile company. So they don't understand that is the main things. Actually, we need to make them digitally literated, actually. So I think, yeah, that is another thing we can do.
So there's a mention, this is a question we have from Rajneesh. So there's a mention by Carlos, maybe, that regulators in Asia Pacific don't seem to be paying much attention to community networks. So how do you define that term attention, and does it need the term community networks within the policies, or mention of rural connectivity will suffice? Seeing that intergovernmental organizations have not been all that keen on the community network terminology in the past. So if maybe you and Carlos can respond to that.
Thanks, Raj, for such another easy question to answer. On the last bit, right? I think again, for me, it's all connected, right? And I think there are interests there who really have made their best at demonizing concepts just because they were seen as competition, and particularly in the plenipotentiary in 2018 that the International Telecommunication Union organized, there were some countries and regulators from some countries that they don't want to change because they have interests with the mobile network operators, and they have said so. So in those international spaces or intergovernmental organizations, they have been interested parties that have said, no, the only model is this one. But not only the only model is this one, the only model is this one because I have shares in this model, which is a bit it talks about the corruption at some point that we need to deal with, and that the fact that community networks are spoken and are taken serious at those spaces mean how powerful that fire can become. But going back to that, we are seeing in many of those intergovernmental spaces changes, like strong changes, and we're only going to see them going forward. Like, well, Teddy was also sitting on the study groups from the ITU, where we've been submitting documentation to prove that community networks are viable, are sustainable, are, like they can do whatever some regulators need. And some blogs have come from countries that do not need community network. Are seeing the value of them, are changing that perspective. And instead of civil society bringing those texts into those intergovernmental spaces, it is those governments, those member states who are bringing that change. And you are seeing Zimbabwe fighting that fight. You are seeing Brazil fighting that fight. You are seeing new countries that are coming into intergovernmental spaces, and things are going to change. I mean, CITEL, the Latin American regional ITU space, is going to bring a proposal into the World Telecoms that the ITU development sector is going to have in Addis Ababa in 2021, supporting community networks and complementary type of access. As I was saying before to Osama, things take time, and we are not fighting. I mean, we are trying to change the mindset of people who are very powerful, that they are stuck in their ways for many years, that they don't want to see and want to do things differently. And we are there. And we have managed to, little by little, country by country, work on this. But it doesn't need to be at the intergovernmental space. It can be also at the country level. We are working, well, at the African level. We have also the African Union Declaration that supports community networks and other complementary access models. And we have many countries that we are accompanying. We are providing technical assistance to different governments. You see how by supporting public consultations that only received comments by the private sector, now alliances with A4AI, with ISO, with APC, with national members, we are changing regulations. In Uganda, now in Ethiopia, is going to change. In Colombia, like in Mexico, we do have the opportunity to working at the international level, at those intergovernmental spaces, as well as the national level with the public consultation. And when they give us the opportunity to participate, we are effectively making that change happen. But we need to change their mindset. We need to get better at doing what we are doing. But changes are happening. We can point where an alliance of civil society has managed to change regulation, which was the first time in history that happened, right? In telecoms, I mean. And we just need to continue doing that. And we need to maybe bring those examples from, get the Ugandan regulator to talk to the Vietnamese regulator and explain, not us, but those regulators that we have managed to convince to go there and talk to other regulators that might have doubts. And is that swell of regulators talking to regulators that I think is the trend that we are going to be seeing in changing that policy in 2021, 2022, that is going to be quite game changer, I would say. Us doing our best at the national level, and then regulators talking to regulators at the international level. And I'm very optimistic about that as well.
Great. So at this point, I want to ask Teddy a question. So, A4AI has been coming out with these reports, and you do a lot of research and analysis and, understanding different contexts, different countries, what are connectivity issues, the affordability issues. There are multiple, nuances that go into this entire conversation. And I think your reports highlight that quite deeply. So I'm going to ask you a very broad, grand question, which is, how many more years do you think it will take to connect everyone in different countries, in different areas. And, do you think we're going to have to wait for another 20, 30 years to have everyone in the world connected, or have affordable access, or, have them, in this space?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. It's
Teddy?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was a bit slow finding the unmute button. It's a good question. I think fundamentally, the answer is it's up to us, not just within this room, but up to kind of the governments that are accountable to us, and to policymakers who are going to decide the trajectory of kind of the next future for the internet and for connectivity in general. We did some research as A4AI with the ITU on connecting humanity that said, if we want to meet the Sustainable Development Goal, which says universal and affordable connectivity by 2030, that's in 10 years, we need to put up 428 billion globally to achieve that. And that has to be spread across a number of different projects, whether that's building out new infrastructure, maintaining this new infrastructure, but also smaller things that are just as important, such as these policy and regulatory developments, for example, through supporting community networks and changing mindsets, but also digital skills. So that brings in a lot of what Ashia was saying as well, of there's something here that has to be done in terms of, making the internet useful across different contexts, across different geographies. Because in addition to affordability, one of these new, it's not necessarily new barriers, but one that's kind of an increasing concern, and one that many people are kind of citing when they get asked, why don't you use the internet, is there's not content that's relevant to me, or there's not content in the language I speak. And so it's thinking about that demand side as well, of, making relevant content, making it available locally, and kind of supporting an internet ecosystem that says that the internet can be and should be relevant to all parts of the world, whether you live in a really rural part or in the dead center of a city, no matter what continent or kind of what language you speak, that this can be a helpful tool for you. And so in terms of kind of where are we headed, how long is this going to take, I think it's going to depend on how serious we're going to be about answering this solution. I hope that it is just these 10 years and that we can get the kind of collective action that is going to be able to see that through. But it's going to be really hard work ahead, because as we think about it, it's as we get closer and closer to achieving the goal that we want to achieve, geography and considerations are going to get harder and harder. But that means it's no less important than the first 20% of the world that was connected. So I think it's hopefully something we can tackle ahead.
Great. So we're almost out of time. So I'm going to give the floor to each speaker. It's what we call, make your last closing sentence or tweetable sentence. So keep it short, keep it brief, and keep it something that we're going to tweet. So over to you, Carlos.
Let's all of us, all the organizations here, work together to find a way to create more enabling policy and regulation in the Asia Pacific region. And APC is super willing to start that process. Just give me a date.
Great. Asha?
I am expecting something for the regulation and policy makers that is a very affordable and women-friendly internet services for all over the world. And another thing is digital literacy and including internet literacy over there. So then people can easily understand actually why we need it and what is actually internet and what is use of it. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Great. And Teddy, the closing tweet from you.
I guess my closing tweet is, it's not short enough to be a good tweet, but it's, I think the discussion we've had here, for me, it's showing kind of just as you can't have a healthy diet that has one ingredient, you can't have a healthy market that just has one business model. Community networks are a crucial part of the diversity that we're going to need to close the connectivity gap. So I hope we have lit a couple more candles, to use Carlos's analogy, and we get to see many more in the near future.
Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, it got stuck at our end. So great. So with this, we come to the end of this really interesting session. We've had different perspectives, people joining in from different countries, different time zones. I think it's been fantastic.